What a new book's explosive revelation tells us about Biden, Trump, and Putin. It's a study in contrasts and of just how dysfunctional the U.S. political system has become, even in the conduct of foreign policy. Over the last several years, around the same period of time U.S. President Joe Biden was confronting Russian President Vladimir Putin, his predecessor Donald Trump was secretly talking to him and opposing U.S. military aid to Ukraine, according to Washington Post journalist Bob Woodward in his new book, War. Among the shocking new disclosures in the book, a copy which was obtained by Foreign Policy ahead of its release date next week, Woodward reports that Trump spoke to Putin as many as 7 times after he left the presidency, and that at one point in 2024, Trump told a senior aide to leave the room at his mansion in Mar-a-Lago so that he could have what he said was a private phone call with the Russian leader. It was not clear how many of the other calls to Putin occurred before or after the Russian invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022, but the disclosures raised new questions about whether the former president might have violated the Logan Act, which forbids a U.S. citizen from communicating without authority from the federal government with foreign officials to influence the measures or conduct any foreign government and in a dispute with the United States. Such questions date back to suggestions that including Trump officials had contact with Russians even before he was inaugurated in January 2017. With the U.S. presidential election less than a month away, the book resurrects unsettled questions about Trump's relationship to Putin and the largely unresolved mystery of the former president's business and financial ties to Russia. In particular, the Woodward disclosures raise fresh questions about Trump's well-documented deference to Putin, especially since Trump has promised to negotiate an end to the Ukraine war in 24 hours if elected, hinting broadly that he would do so by forcing Ukraine to cede territory to Russia and forswear joining NATO, which is partly what Putin demands. Going back to just days before the invasion, as Russian troops were amassing on the Ukrainian border, the former president went out of his way to praise Putin for his aggression. Quote, "I said, this is genius. Putin declares a big portion of the Ukraine as independent. Oh, that's wonderful," end quote. Trump told a right-wing radio program February 22, 2022. He also suggested that Putin's efforts to subsum Ukraine could be a model for how the United States should deal with its immigration problem. "We could use that on our southern border. That's the strongest peace force I've ever seen," Trump said. As Woodward writes, Trump's unwillingness to criticize Putin was not a one-off incident, but a consistent character trait. Woodward describes his source on Trump's post-presidential phone calls to Putin as a single anonymous Trump aide, but when he asked Jason Miller, the former president's top 2024 campaign aide, about the calls, Miller did not outright deny Woodward's account, but said, "I'd push back on that." Asked further whether Trump could resolve the Ukraine war with one phone call, as a former president has occasionally claimed, Miller said, "I think he could. He knows the pressure points, he knows what is going to motivate both sides, and I think he can do that with one phone call each," meaning to Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky respectively. Woodward also quotes Dan Coates, Trump's former director of national intelligence, as saying he himself has long been mystified by Trump's relationship with Putin. "He is reaching out and never saying anything bad about Putin. For me, it's scary," Coates told Woodward. Asked to comment on Woodward's reporting, Trump campaign spokesperson Stephen Chung responded with a lengthy personal broadside against the journalist. "None of these made-up stories by Woodward are true and are the work of a truly demented, deranged man who suffers from debilitating case of Trump derangement syndrome," Chung said, in a statement adding that Trump is really already successfully suing Woodward because of the unauthorized publishing of recordings he made previously. Chung added, "Woodward is a total sleazebag who has lost it mentally, and he's slow, lethargic, incompetent, and overall a boring person with no personality," end quote. Chung did not mention that Trump has agreed to numerous interviews with Woodward, who is regarded as Washington's leading chronicler of presidents going back to 1989. Woodward also supplies some harrowing news details on Biden's missiles of October moment in 2022, parts of which have been previously reported. In the fall of that year, 6 months into Putin's faltering invasion of Ukraine and in the face of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, the Biden administration began receiving alarming intelligence that the Russian president was increasingly desperate over his battlefield losses. New intelligence reports indicate that there was a 50% chance Russia would use a tactical nuclear weapon, an assessment that was dramatically up from 5% and then 10% earlier in the war, Woodward writes. According to the book, Biden swiftly directed his National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, on all channels, get on the line with the Russians, tell them that what we will do in response. Biden told his team to use language that is threatening without being directly threatening. Woodward writes, "We need to open up a channel," Biden reportedly said, not on negotiating Ukraine, but on the United States and Russia avoiding a cataclysm. In a phone conversation in October, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin warned his Russian counterpart, then Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, "Our leaders and your leaders have repeatedly said a nuclear war can never be won and should never be fought. This could put us on a path to confrontation that would have existential implications for you and for us. Don't step on that slippery slope," he said. Austin further told Shoigu that if nuclear weapons were used, all the restraints that we have been operating under in Ukraine would be reconsidered. According to Woodward, this would isolate Russia on the world stage to a degree you Russians cannot fully appreciate. When Shoigu responded that he did not like being threatened, Austin countered, "Mr. Minister, I am the leader of the most powerful military in the history of the world. I don't make threats," according to Woodward's account. 2 days later, Shoigu called back and falsely claimed that Ukrainians were planning to use a dirty bomb, quote unquote, which the United States believed the Kremlin was putting out as a pretext to deploy a nuclear weapon. "We don't believe you," Austin said, according to Woodward. "We don't see any indication of this, and the world will see through this. Don't do it." Shoigu responded, "I understand," according to the book. Woodward also corroborates other accounts, including a book published by CNN's Jim Sciotto in March, The Return of the Great Powers, that previously reported Biden sent other emissaries as well, such as CIA Director Bill Burns, to warn the Russians and enlisted the help of major nations, especially Russia's number one partner, China, to discourage Moscow from using nuclear weapons. During a visit to China in late April, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken praised Beijing's important influence in moving Russia away from the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine, even as Blinken harshly criticized Beijing for assisting Russia in other ways. As Woodward recounts it, Colin Kahl, senior Pentagon official at the time, later described that period in the fall of 2022 as probably the most hair-raising moment of the whole war. It was also a moment when Biden, to a degree not fully disclosed previously, may have proved his mettle as a world leader, one that was reminiscent of nothing so much as President John F. Kennedy's stand against Moscow during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. It's noteworthy that Woodward also quotes Biden as being critical of the president he served as Vice President, Barack Obama, suggesting that Obama's relatively mild response to Putin's partial occupation of eastern Ukraine and annexation of Crimea in 2014 had been a terrible mistake. "That's why we are here. We effed up," Biden reportedly said. "Barack never took Putin seriously. We gave Putin license to continue. Well, I'm revoking his effing license," he said. In the 2.5 years since Russia invaded Ukraine, Biden has often been criticized for temporizing over his response and failing to offer the Ukrainians sufficient defense weaponry quickly enough. He has hesitated in sending first-generation main battle tanks such as the M1A1 Abrams, long-range precision artillery, and fighter jets such as the F-16, though ultimately he's done so. And in October 2022, after Ukraine launched its successful Kharkiv counteroffensive, Biden warned Americans of a potential nuclear Armageddon, saying it was the first time since Cuba Missile Crisis that there had been a direct threat of nuclear weapons being deployed. The degree to which Ukraine has fought off Russia's advances, causing hundreds of thousands of casualties from Russia, is also worrisome in view of another conversation Woodward recounts between U.S. General Mark Milley, then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and his Russian counterpart, General Valery Gerasimov. As to state the conditions for Russian use of nuclear weapons, Gerasimov responded that one of them involved the right to use tactical nuclear weapons in the event of catastrophic battlefield losses. Milley responded to that time that none of those conditions are going to obtain, but they could be before long. Thus, the world now has a better idea why Biden has acted as he has, even as questions about Trump's relationship with Putin only grow. During his rise in national politics, Trump has repeatedly denied that he has any personal connection to Russian leader that might suggest Putin has any leverage over him, even as he has refused to criticize Putin. Yet in recent years, both Justice Department investigation led by former FBI Director Robert Mueller and a bipartisan report by then Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee detailed extensive ties between Trump associates in Russia and identified a close associate of former Trump's campaign. Woodward reports that Putin said at an economic conference in Russia in September, Mr. Trump says he will resolve all burning issues within several days, including the Ukrainian crisis. We cannot help but feel happy about it. Other investigations and news reports have detailed how dependent Trump's failing businesses had grown to become on financing from Russia and former Soviet republics before he ran for president. This is from Foreign Policy on DNYUZ. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. Support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.